The heart pumps blood into the arteries, connected via capillaries to veins. Okay? Arteries carry blood away from the heart. And that's what gets to the lungs, gets to the rest of the body. Veins go back. Okay? That's why you have the red versus the blue. Anybody not understand that? See that? Okay. So veins carry blood back to the heart. Blood composition. You have serum, which is the liquid part of your blood. You have formed elements, which is the erythrocytes, the leukocytes, platelets. If you were to spin blood, get rid of the formed elements, get rid of the clotting agents, which are in serum, you would have plasma. So when you do plasma donations, okay?
Wait, so what's the difference between blood and serum?
It's only a liquid part.
Blood has everything in it. Serum is the liquid part of the blood.
But
Get
including...
rid of the erythrocytes and the leukocytes. But it has like clotting proteins.
Wait, so serum is with the erythrocytes and leukocytes?
That's all in your blood. You have cells going
So
through
what's
your blood.
not part of the serum that's part of the blood? Wait.
Everything except for
Rephrase. Okay.
Wait, so
Everything-
formed elements are part of serum?
They're part of the blood. Formed elements are cells,
Right.
and they're in your blood.
I know, but is it
Serum
part of the
is
serum?
the liquid portion.
No.
Oh,
of your
well,
blood.
then what's the difference between serum and plasma? then?
If you remove the clotting
Then it's
proteins,
Then it's
then you have plasma. Because liquid portion still has the proteins and the clotting agents.
Is that right? Then I had that backwards. I thought it was serum did not have the clotting, and the plasma did.
What I was reading was the plasma is liquid when formed elements and clotting proteins are removed from the blood.
I was almost positive. I'll look it up. Maybe I was wrong, but
So
I was.
formed elements are in serum?
They're in your
No.
blood.
Then I don't get what the difference is between serum and plasma. Or
Serum,
missing-
because the
I'm
way
missing
I was
something.
understanding the book today was that serum is the, basically just a liquid portion.
Right.
The way they said it was the plasma was the, when you remove.
We might want to look that up because I'm
Sounds
almost
like
Yeah,
positive that
so
if you
we'll
take.
look it up and I can throw that on D2L later, but that's.
Just don't put it on the test.
I think if there's serum on the test, it's the liquid portion.
Don't have a question like, what is the difference between serum and plasma?
No, there isn't. If there's a question, it's
Okay.
what's serum, liquid portion, you know, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Okay. So, cardiovascular system. I mean, I don't know. You have the heart. You have our heart bilateral, left side, right side. You have atriums, and you have ventricles. So the bottom part's ventricles, on top we have the atriums, okay? And so it gets pumped in, goes through the valves. You also have 3 levels. So you have the pericardium, myocardium, and the endocardium. There's 3 different tissue levels in the heart. But I don't know if any of you heard of the universe within, or any of those like body. They have one in Vegas. They have a couple there where they've actually
I have
plasticized
heard
the bodies,
Yes.
and so they have them, and it's kind of morbidly cool to look at. Is they actually have it where you can see all of the
Just like
capillaries.
that.
It looks like that, but yet it's real. So I mean, it's kind of a cool thing to look at and realize, you know, we have these major, you know, arteries, veins going through everywhere, but then also just all the little branches to make sure that we can get blood to every part of our body. Because what is blood's main function? One of the main functions of it?
Carry nutrients such as oxygen.
Oxygen. And that's really, we want to, you know, muscles kind of like oxygen to make ATP and stuff, so oxygen's the big thing. Okay, movement, blood and lymph nodes, okay? So the right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs, oxygen enters blood, and carbon dioxide diffuses out. I mean, we want to make sure it's that whole going through the respiratory system. We want to make sure we keep getting oxygen. Oxygenated blood returns to the heart through the left ventricle, and so the blood then moves to the arteries, capillaries, and the capillaries are what carry it to the surrounding tissue. And then whatever fluid ends up being leaked, gets picked up by that lymphatic system. So this is, if you've ever wondered why you have blue and red veins, it's because is it oxygenated or is it depleted of oxygen? Which one would be red?
Oxygen.
Bright red would be oxygenated.
Iron, rust is red. Easy way to remember things. So, infections. If we're looking at infections to the blood vascular system, you can have a bacterium, which is the presence of bacteria in the blood. You can have septicemia, septis, which is a microbial infection in the blood that causes an illness. So the difference between having it, is it there, and if it's actually causing the illness. This also means you can have a septic shock, so extremely low blood pressure from blood vessel dilation. So dilating, the blood pressure drops, you don't have enough blood. Also, gram-negative septicemia. So we've talked about gram-negative and the problems gram-negative bacteria cause multiple times. What is the major problem with them? Gram-negative, what do they do?
Release endotoxins on both of those.
Coagulation.
They have the endotoxins and you get that lipid A. Okay, so that lipid A, which then gives you all sorts of, what does it be? You have fevers, the list we've talked about, but yeah, the endotoxin is a major problem with the gram-negative. And so you get that dissemination, widespread coagulation. Toxemia. So if you also have heard of toxemia, it's just the release of bacterial toxins in the blood. The basic signs and symptoms: fever, nausea, chills, vomiting, diarrhea. Septic shock can develop rapidly. So, infections of heart valves or inner surface of the heart. So, anything that causes the heart to be messed with can be caused by normal microbiota and other bacteria. So, if normal microbiota is causing us to become sick, it is a
Opportunistic.
Okay. So, spread of bacteria from other sources of infection. So, if you get an infected tooth or skin lesion or intravascular catheter, this is one thing you really have to, there are certain patients, like my cousin he was born with a hole in his heart that was upside down and backwards. And so when he had an infected tooth, his heart's already weakened. And so it's one of those things where those can be very bad because that can spread, that bacteria can spread, and if you already have a weakened heart, that can kill you. So it's one of those things, there are certain things that you don't really think that, oh, he died of a toothache. Endocarditis. So, signs and symptoms of this would be like fever, fatigue, and also patients usually will have some obvious source of infection, and it's patients with abnormal hearts have that increased risk. Now, if we're going to be dealing with a bacteria, what would be the most likely treatment? Antibiotics, antibacterial drugs. This is why people with bad hearts, a lot of times, anytime they go to like the dentist, will be put on antibiotics, just because if anything was introduced, we want to kill it and make sure it doesn't get into the heart. So, systemic diseases are diseases that are carried throughout the body, and pathogens are carried by the blood and the lymph nodes. So that's one of the things to remember is that if someone says, okay, it's systemic, that means that it's going everywhere, and that the most common way for it to travel throughout our entire body is the blood system and the lymph nodes. If you get a pathogen in the lymph nodes, then that means every time the blood passes through those, what are lymph nodes?
Filters?
They're the filter systems. That means every time blood passes through the filter system, it's actually going to be picking up pathogens and transporting to another part of the body. Okay. Plague. So, why pesties? Zoonotic disease, natural endemic reservoir, so natural host is rodent. Did more reading on it, and it's the fleas. Because fleas will bite us, they will bite rats, they will bite us. So that was really what, it's the animal-to-animal transmission, but having those rats, and then also, you could get rat droppings, but rats were the host. It amplifies in most mammals. This is also known as the bubonic plague. So,
That was one of my questions.
yeah, it is the plague. So it's characterized by enlarged lymph nodes called ools. You can get the pneumonic plague, which occurs when it spreads to the lungs. So if it's not in the lungs, it's just bubonic. If it's in the lungs, you got the pneumonic.
That was the question I had when I read this. There's no physiological difference between bubonic and pneumonic plague. It's just the pattern of aerosol spray that causes it to be so much more deadly.
It's what tissue types is it? Yeah. So I mean, if you don't have it in the lungs, you're not going to be sneezing it at people as easily. So if it's in the lungs, you're going to be, it's different transmission because are you going to have a pustule or are you going to be sneezing and talking?
The book indicated that somebody who got the plague had a 50-50 chance of, bubonic plague had a 50-50 chance of surviving, and somebody who got pneumonic plague, it was almost 100% fatal. So I was trying to understand what was the difference besides transmission. If both people had the plague, I don't see how it matters where it came from as to regard to mortality.
Your lungs. How important are your lungs? So difference is, are your lungs infected? If not, you have a chance to live. If your lungs are infected and you can't really get oxygen, you're not
That
really
makes
gonna live.
sense. Makes
So
sense.
it's the whole, yeah, what body part's affected matters. Okay? So, it's the Black Death, a historical pandemic. Mid-5th century through 8th century, 40 million deaths, 30% decline in Europe population.
Damn.
A third of the population was gone. And so it's just, it was brutal. It really was. So it was transmitted, contact with an infected animal, or if you got the flea or feces of either, you had chances of getting the plague. Bubonic was 50% versus pneumonic, which is 100% fatal. Nowadays, if you want to treat it, you diagnose it quickly. And you'd think that, oh, this is this is an old disease. No, they recently found one. They closed a park because they found a squirrel they were randomly testing. Found a squirrel, this was in California, that had the plague. We're like,
That was just recently.
yeah. So it's,
Scary.
some of these things you're like, wait a minute, what was that? That was the plague, not just a plague, but like any plague that, So, it's still around.
That's why I don't go camping.
So basically, you would treat it with antimicrobial drugs and prevent rodents and fleas. The joke was that never mind bug spray next time, I'm wearing a flea collar. Since fleas are most likely the way you would be getting it. Okay. So the bubonic plague, the lymph nodes, the groin, the armpit, neck area, painful. Spread from the lymphatic to circulatory system, so the bacterium to septicemia. Subcutaneous hemorrhaging, what does that mean?
Under the skin.
Okay, so underneath your skin, you start having death of tissue, darkening of dead skin, Black Death. So, if your arm starts having black patches, it sucks, but not life-threatening. If you start getting that in your lungs, you really can't live very well. And also this is the untreated rates because they didn't know what they were dealing with then, so how could they really treat this? But yeah, we have better survival now just because we know how to treat things with antibiotics. Okay. So, life cycles. Natural host. It likes to be in rats. But, you know, you have one rat that's infected, flea bites it, goes to another, you know, rat, and infects that. And more fleas are infected, fleas bite us. And then all of a sudden, you now have bubonic plague. If that ends up getting into the lungs, then you can pass it airborne.
Oh, wow.
You get
Okay.
bubonic plague. Okay. So this is also, you know, you have direct contact with the rodents. That could cause it. Make sense? Don't touch rats. Lyme disease. Okay. Caused by Bergedorf berry. Zoonosis. Okay, big thing, transmitted by deer ticks. We are an accidental host. It's really not trying to get into us, but it happens. This is why you go out for walks in the woods, you're always supposed to check yourself for ticks. It takes them a while to actually give you the disease. I think you have like 24 hours before they warm up right and it's actually transmitted, so that's why you can check yourself, remove ticks. But the first stage, rash begins as red spots that grow to 15 centimeters in diameter, and you have flu-like symptoms. So you won't totally know you've got it, but the major characteristic of Lyme disease is that bullseye rash. It does transmit to you, get some neurological symptoms, you get some severe arthritis. Also magnesium instead of iron starts to circumvent the host defenses, so it's one of those things where it starts taking out your immune system. This is what it would look like underneath the microscope, like, you know, with check, draw someone's blood.
So the little squirrely things. Wow.
When I look at blood, I don't normally see little squirrely things, so yes.
Right. Wow.
Lyme disease. But
Oh, wow.
it has a bullseye rash. So, Lyme disease, bullseye rash, deer ticks. Neurological symptoms, so you get the meningitis, the encephalitis, the peripheral nerve abnormalities, cardiac dysfunction. Your heart doesn't really want to work. So that's second stage. So first stage, flu-like. Starts getting worse. And then third stage, you start getting that severe arthritis. And so the only real treatment is, and with everything, earlier you catch it, the better. And so you gotta treat it with the antibiotics.
Would you say the second stage is much more serious than the third stage? Because it seems like the
In
thing.
the first stage. The first stage you have flu-like symptoms.
I'm talking about if it goes untreated, wouldn't the symptoms of the
add
second
up.
stage be more deadly than the third stage?
Well, if you're at the third stage, you have all the second stages, plus the third stage.
Oh, so those other things are still going on from the second stage?
Wow.
So, I mean, neurological issues don't really go away. If you're, yeah. Okay. So, what are we looking at? You have uninfected eggs. They hatch, they crawl around, they want to look and jump on some kind of animal. So you get your little larvae, find something to, some kind of host. After feeding, they drop off, they multiply. Infected larvae, winter, start feeding the infected larvae, start to develop. And the infected then feed on the animals for humans, and you start getting the adults feeding on deer and mating and starting that cycle again. So it's a weird, 2-year cycle for them to become infectious. Okay. But yeah, they don't really want to be infecting us. We just happen to be there. They want to be eating the deer. Because then the deer, lay the eggs, and start the whole cycle again. just remember, they are really small. So when you're checking for ticks, with anything out of the ordinary black dots, it can go away. Infectious mononucleosis, okay? Epstein-Barr virus, EBV. So we're looking at signs and symptoms. We got fatigue, fever, sore throat, enlarged lymph nodes. Sorry, Lyme disease is apparently on the rise. That's not good. Many infections are asymptomatic, so you get these common infections, and so, I mean, most of us actually have antibodies against it, but there can be some cases where, you don't, and so you get like the hairy leukias, the Burkitt's lymphomas. It's transmitted versus saliva, via saliva. The virus infects the throat and the salivary glands, and then will spread through lymph nodes, affect your B cells. Not pretty. So it all depends on what kind of immune system you have. What is the state of your cellular immunity, to what level you're going to see this disease. If you don't have an immune system, because why would you not have an immune system?
It's compromised.
HIV, if you have some disease that makes you immunodeficient, or you were unfortunate enough to be born with SCIDs, so you don't have an immune system, then you can start having the oral caries, or you just have a weakened immune system. So you can start getting chronic fatigue, you can get the Burkitt's lymphoma. If you have a good immune system, then you're asymptomatic. You might not even realize this. And vigorous immune system, you can actually start fighting early. Okay. Epstein-Barr, it likes to be latent. It's a latent infection, so it can hide out for a while. It's been implicated in a number of other diseases, so, because most of us have strong, normal, healthy immune systems, so this is why you can have 95% of Americans above the age of 30 with antibodies against it, because we've gotten it, we fought it, we're asymptomatic. But it's more of, what are the other things associated with it, is where it's really been coming up in medical fields, because they're noticing correlations. And, it's not good because it takes out your B cells. B cells are important. Why?
B cells?
B cells?
B
Antibodies.
cells. Yeah.
Making
Part
antibodies.
of your immune system. I don't want those. Okay. Diagnosis is presence of a large lobed B lymphocytes. And treatment usually is more of how can we ease these symptoms. You can't really prevent it because it's very widespread. So we're at a stage where we're more of like, how can we just make this easier? Yellow fever. There are multiple stages. So first, the fever, you have headache, muscles ache, then it goes away. And then comes the third stage. You get the delirium, the seizures, the coma, hemorrhaging. All really not good things. It's caused by the yellow fever virus. It's transmitted by a bite, an infected mosquito. And so this is the virus that will travel to your liver to where it replicates. Most yellow fever cases occur in South America and Africa, and they look for viral agents in the blood. How would you look for a viral agent in the blood? What test would you do? ELISA. Okay. Treatment is supportive, so how do we just kind of take care of the signs and symptoms? There is a vaccine available. And so if you're going to go to South America or Africa, probably get the vaccine, because mosquitoes are everywhere.
When you say treatment is supported, you mean there's no official treatment?
Yes. How can we kind of ease these symptoms? Because depending on
Nets,
how bad
and all that
is
kind of
your delirium or your seizures, can we try to prevent seizures? Can we, what aspects, what signs and symptoms are you having, and how can we help you deal with these? Because everyone's different. Okay. Dengue fever and dengue hemorrhagic fever. So first you get fever, edema, head and muscle pain. And then you get a return of that fever and you get this red rash. If it's hemorrhagic fever, then you also get internal bleeding. And with internal bleeding, a lot of times comes shock and death, or at least possibility of death. There are multiple viruses that cause this: dengue virus 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, it's by the same types of mosquitoes as vectors, so the Aedes mosquitoes. So you never really quite knew how deadly that little mosquito bite can be, but mosquitoes end up being different strains of mosquitoes end up being different vectors of multiple things. And there is some weird ways they're trying to prevent this. You have some very unethical science still going on today where some people will say, well, it's only the female mosquitoes that bite. So they've engineered some of the mosquitoes to where if they're female, they won't ever grow wings, so they'll end up dying. And they introduce that gene into the males, and then released them into the wild. Because in some of those parts of the country, in the world, there isn't as much control. And their idea is that, oh, well, the males should go mate with the wild type females, and then all of the females, all the kids will die. All the female kids will die, and all the males can then go and mate with more wild type. So you're like, well, that sounds great in a laboratory, but you're just releasing male mosquitoes into the world. So there's a number of weird mosquito trials going all around the world right now. Okay, dengue fever, hemorrhagic fever. You have the little virus, infects the monocyte, you have the dengue fever. You recover with antibodies to dengue in the blood. Okay? Then, what really problematic is reinfection. And so these viruses and antibodies can form these complexes. Then that virus-antibody complex is phagocytosed. And so you end up getting activation of memory T cells. So you get increased production, making it inflamed, and then you get that hemorrhagic fever. So you can actually go through and have just dengue fever, which then second round turn into dengue hemorrhagic fever.
So you can only get dengue hemorrhagic fever if you previously have had dengue fever?
I don't want to say you can only, because there aren't really a lot of absolutes in life, but most often, yes. I am sure that there is somebody who got dengue fever for the first time and it went straight to hemorrhagic. Just because, but in general, no. Okay. So dengue fever is usually mild disease. The hemorrhagic fever, more severe, bleeding, terminally bleeding. Okay. Diagnostics is based on signs and symptoms in people who have traveled to endemic regions. So it's one of those things of where have you been? Okay, then we need to start looking at these things. So there's no specific treatment available, and prevention is control of mosquitoes. So this is why if you're going somewhere, mosquito repellent. African viral hemorrhagic fever. So you get fever, you get fatigue. It can progress into severe internal hemorrhaging. Okay? So this is caused by the Ebola virus. Now, you've all heard of the Ebola virus. Okay? So most of these diseases are in Africa. So primarily in Africa, transmitted via contact with bodily fluids of infected individuals. Diagnosis is based on characteristics, or the signs and symptoms. Let's look at the blood, can we see it? And you're going to basically be trying to pump them full of liquids and electrolytes. And they're trying to do vaccines, they're still being studied.
For the purpose of the test, there's no vaccine for this, right?
The vaccines are underway. They're trying. We don't have a great vaccine that's out
But
there
if there
yet.
were a test question, the answer would be there is really no vaccine for African viral hemorrhagic fever.
Filamentous. So it's always interesting to look at, you hear about these on the news, you hear about the horrible things they can do. It's, I don't know, I think it's kind of interesting sometimes to actually look at what is this that we're actually, it's causing these problems. So this is what Ebola virus looks like. Protozoas in the phylum complicate the disease. So it's one of those things where it's not always, there's a lot of horrible diseases, but it's not usually just the disease, it's the fact that it can be compounded with multiple bacteria or diseases that really make it horrible. Okay, so Plasmodia, another one of these diseases. So, sporocytes are injected into the host during a blood meal. Okay? So, right there, blood meal makes you think of mosquito. Okay? So, sporocytes, they invade the liver, and then the liver cell ruptures, and you get numerous parasites in the blood. These then go, and they can penetrate the erythrocytes.
Oh, I saw that.
So you can do this erythrocyte cycle. So you just make more and more of them, or they can come out here. And so some of the merocytes will develop into gametocytes within the erythrocytes. And then those gametocytes are in blood cells, and mosquitoes ingest the gametocytes during a blood meal. The gametocytes become gametes that fuse to form a zygote. So they just are using us to kind of replicate those haploids. And so it's that zygote that differentiates in the gut wall of the mosquito. And then it can go through and start becoming again. So it's one of those things where it has a two-part, has to infect us and come out of us so that it can then infect the mosquito and finish up there so that it can then infect us again. So there's a lot of these very odd diseases that some of them will need both the mosquito and the human host. And so this is why they're trying to, when they come up with a vaccine or something for this, they're trying to knock out multiple parts of that pathway. Because if you knock out one, then the chances are that it's going to figure out how to overcome that one blockage. But if you block it 2 or 3 spots, the likelihood that the pathogen is going to figure out how to overcome all of those is a lot less. Does that make sense? Never go for one approach, always go for multiple. Okay. Malaria, okay? Associated with the parasitic life cycle. Malaria is one of the diseases that was the first one where we ever really saw genetically where being a carrier was a good thing of a genetic disease. Anyone know what the genetic disease is associated with malaria?
Sickle cell
P.
anemia.
Sickle cell anemia. So you have one copy of sickle cell and you're resistant to malaria. You have 2 copies and you have sickle cell anemia and life's not good. You have no copies and then you have no resistance to malaria. So that's one of those diseases that is held in the population. Sickle cell is very common in populations where there's malaria because there's a high prevalence of carriers, because being a carrier gives you a benefit against malaria, and so then you're going to have a lot more carriers, and the carriers are going to mate, and they have a much more chance of having acute sickle cell. With most of these, you get fever, chills, weakness, fatigue, anemia. Okay. There are 4 Plasmodia species that can cause malaria, and depending on the species, varies the severity of the disease. So the reproductive cycle hides the parasite from immunosurveillance. That's one thing that sucks, is that our body doesn't even really know that it's infected. And then the malaria secretomes inject toxins into host cells, and adhesions allow the red blood cells to adhere to certain tissues. And then the merocytes form within vesicles, they avoid infections since they're already within these vesicles. And these changes in body chemistry attract other mosquitoes so that they're going to start eating your blood and can transport it more. So P. falciparum causes the most severe form of malaria, and there are certain genetic traits which can increase that resistance. This is usually throughout the tropics, subtropics, and you have to diagnose it by looking at the plasmodium in the blood, and the treatments are all going to vary based on which mosquito bit you. So which form of this do you have, so they know how to treat it best. So again, the best way to treat this is prevent mosquitoes from biting you. Okay? Lots and lots of diseases. Really quick version. Questions before we move on?
Is there a vaccine for malaria?